Hey everybody, I'm from UMA. The original title of this was Let Anyone and Everyone Run Your DAO Treasury, but it's actually a little bit more than that. It's just letting anyone and everyone run your DAO and turn your DAO into a DAO. Because a lot of DAOs right now aren't particularly decentralized or autonomous or organized. So we can do better with some clever Oracle stuff that I'll get into. So first things first, what's UMA? UMA is an optimistic oracle that can provide and verify any arbitrary data on chain. We're extremely flexible and we have strong economic guarantees. If you're familiar with optimistic rollups, you might have an inkling of where I'm going with this, of how our oracle actually works. So what does an oracle do? The job is to be a trusted or trustless source of information. The broader space has moved away from trusted oracles to more decentralized versions, and they can let the base consensus layer remain deterministic and secure while allowing the state of the world to be accessible and actionable on-chain. There are actually, I think, very few use cases for building a decentralized application where oracles would not be useful. You've got rare exceptions like a Uniswap or something where you can literally encode everything into the smart contract. Most systems would benefit from being able to get information about the world, get information about other chains, even something like doing off-chain calculation in a less gas-intensive way. Even if you could calculate something in a Solidity contract, if you could calculate it in Python, you might as well use an oracle and get the end result, which is all you really care about, as long as that oracle is trustworthy. So this is what people typically think of when they're thinking about oracles. Price feed oracles try to verify correctness in advance. So generally you'll have some data source or set of data sources and some number of nodes that are looking at those data sources and they're pushing the data on chain. And this is kind of the powerhouse for DeFi, getting prices of stuff, getting prices of crypto, etc. It's not as good for scalability and it's not super flexible. So if you have a weird identifier, you have some unusual kind of data, or you have data you might not need very frequently, this doesn't work that well for that. You might even need a piece of data only once, and it might be securing only like a few $1,000s in value or something, and that matters to you, but it's not going to be cost effective, it's not going to make sense to run nodes that are delivering that data with a price feed style oracle. So what we do at UMA is an optimistic oracle. So we enforce correctness after a dispute. So if you're familiar with optimistic rollups, it's basically a process where somebody makes a proposal, the proposal is assumed to be true if it's not disputed within a particular challenge window, and then you have some method of arriving at the correct answer after a dispute. So it's really flexible. It can adapt to any data methodology. It can serve all kinds of use cases. It's less deterministic. It has a price tagged manipulation. So our economic design ensures that proposers are incentivized to only propose correct answers because they post a bond with their proposal that they'll lose if they're successfully disputed. Disputers are incentivized to watch all the proposals and dispute anything that's wrong because they get a big chunk of that bond. And then if a dispute actually goes to the UMA voters, they're incentivized to vote correctly because they can't see how anybody else is voting. And the value of their UMA tokens that give them voting power is going to go down if the oracle is wrong or if it's attacked. So lazy voting is ruled out by having secret votes. Bribery is made more difficult by having secret votes. And in general, we keep an eye on how much money could you steal from every system in a worst case scenario, everything that relies on our oracle, and would it be worth it to you? If you could bribe somebody, in an economically rational way, and we ensure that that is not the case. So this is just a kind of a visual slide. So on the far left, you can imagine just token prices, your typical DeFi stuff, price feed oracle type things. Super useful, but it's a very small amount of the data that exists in the world that could be useful for other things. And we're kind of there for generalized contracting. So this is kind of hinting towards where I'm going with DAO governance. You can write an actual contract in natural language, and if the contract is legible, if a proposer, a disputer, a voter is able to read the contract and understand what it means and whether it's being followed, you can now enforce it on chain with all of these economic incentives to ensure correctness. Kind of went through all this. So you've got a requester making the request for some data. You got a proposer. They post a bond. You've got a disputer, watches the proposers. Dispute resolution process. This is that step where all of the UMA token holders get together and independently put down a secret commitment of what they think the actual answer is. You have a documented methodology of truth that those voters can refer to make sure that they're arriving at the correct answer. And this is kind of a Schelling point game, if you're familiar with Vitalik's writing on that from back in the day. And you have economic guarantees. You have some rationale for why people are incentivized to do the right thing. And in practice, disputes are super rare because proposers get disputed really fast and they lose their bonds, so there's not much reason to do an incorrect proposal. And that's by design. So I think disputes are maybe like once every couple of months. Most of the votes that come out are more around these documented methodologies of truth, like adding identifiers that can be supported by the oracle, adding types of questions that you can ask. This is kind of a process flow. I won't belabor this slide too much, but I'll share the slides later if you want to take a look at this and kind of understand all the steps in more detail. So these aren't theoretical things. These are things people have built already. So we've got prediction markets. We've got DeFi insurance, checking for smart contract hacks, optimistic governance. This is what I'll be talking about. Rewards as a service, having more specialized rewards for people outside of just like, here's an airdrop of some tokens, and I hope that you will work to make the token go up. KPI options, also kind of along those lines. You could have a token that you give to somebody that's backed by some underlying collateral, and their payout is based on a KPI. So if you're trying to increase TVL in your system, for instance, you can make that your KPI, and you could airdrop it to people that you think can increase the overall TVL of the system, and they're not just getting your tokens directly, they get a greater amount of tokens if that KPI is getting hit. So you've got more interesting on-chain incentives. And success tokens, which is kind of a variant of that. Success tokens are like a native token plus an embedded call option. So it's a more aligned way to raise venture capital funding. So instead of giving VCs a discount where it's like half off on the market price of the token, they pay full price for the market price of a token, but if the token price is higher than that after some lockup period of 2 years or something, they get the value of that call option beyond that point. So it is something that incentivizes them to work to increase the price and not just dump because it doesn't matter if the price goes down because they got a big discount. And here you can see what are the kinds of questions that actually power these things. So Polymarket's a prediction market that uses us. Type of question might be like, did the Trailblazers win? That's easy to look up. Sherlock is a DeFi insurance protocol. It's asking, was such and such protocol hacked? Cross is a cross-chain bridge that the UMA team actually worked on and is spinning off as a separate DAO with its own token and totally community-owned. And they're asking, like, was this relay correct? A relayer sends some funds to somebody on the receiving chain after a deposit on the sending chain, and they're saying, this relay was correct. I want to get reimbursed from the liquidity pool. Was it correct? Success tokens, Shapeshift did a success token raise. So it was entirely on-chain and DeFi native, sold about $3 million worth of success tokens to Coinbase Ventures and others, I actually forget. But fully DeFi native on-chain venture capital raise. And they're selling the same success tokens in a public sale too, so other people can kind of get the same terms. And then KPI options. So with Boba Network, it's an optimistic roll-up on Ethereum. What was Boba's TVL in February 2022? And they're doing different KPI options each month to kind of focus on whatever it is that they want to increase right now and spreading that to everybody that uses their network, which is kind of cool. All right, so pushing it to the limit. Optimistic governance, optimistic DAO governance. The idea here is you publish your rules off-chain somewhere. So it can be like an IPFS hash, or it can be a website even, just somewhere where you can go and read the rules. And then you can reference the rules in a proposer contract that's linked to our Oracle. And now anybody can propose and anyone can dispute transactions. So the Oracle checks if the transactions follow the rules. So basically, you can set up a Gnosis safe. This is where it's geared towards. You could deploy this module with the Gnosis safe. You can get rid of the multi-sig entirely, no multi-sig control, just fully decentralized. And now anybody can look at the rules and propose valid transactions. If they're not disputed, they can be executed. If they are disputed but they were valid, they can be executed after the resolution period. And if they're not correct, if they're not following the rules, anybody can dispute them. So it's kind of acting like a court of law now, but it's acting like a civil law system. The Oracle's not trying to read between the lines. It's not trying to do interpretations. It just figures out, do these transactions clearly follow the rules? If they go against the rules or if it's unclear, reject the transactions. So that kind of gives you a lot of flexibility in building out how your DAO would actually run. It removes trust assumptions with a multi-sig. It also removes bottlenecks of having only certain people be able to take some action. Yeah, so this is kind of the solution. This is the initial one. A really easy rule you could think about is, did this proposal pass a snapshot vote? Right now, you can do a snapshot vote and then sort of hope that the team follows what the snapshot vote said in a lot of cases. Like, it's not actually enforceable on chain. It's like a temperature check. People are maybe going to be mad at you, but like, it's not enforceable for the most part. This makes it enforceable. If you have some proposal, it goes to a snapshot vote, the token holders approved it, and the team doesn't like it, that's too bad. Like, you can enforce it on chain now. You can propose those transactions, you can make them go through. So we're going to focus on a tight integration with a snapshot and safe snap and controlling Gnosis safes, and kind of make it like a, like a drag and drop kind of GUI driven experience. You just deploy your safe, you deploy this module. Really the technical part is composing the transactions that go into a proposal. But there's various kinds of transaction builders that you can use with Snapshot too. This is just kind of like going over what I just said. So the code is there to handle proposals, disputes, and execution in a gas-efficient way. If you're interested in the details, it's not actually going to store the proposals on chain. It'll emit all of the information in events. And then when you go to execute it, you can find that proposal information in the events and just re-enter the same information to execute it. It'll check that the hashes match, that everything was approved, and so on. It's pretty far along. I'll share these slides, and I can also just share these links directly if anybody's curious about it. So it's ready enough to be used in a hackathon, not ready enough to be used in production. We need to get our Open Zeppelin audit, yeah, I've also got like the UMIP, so the UMA improvement proposal that describes how voters should determine the truth about whether a proposal is valid or not. All right, so moving beyond voting systems and multi-sigs, basically my theory is we have the governance systems we have now out of expedience and what can be easily written into smart contract code. So having a vote on every little thing is not any way to run a large complex operation. And if we had other options, we wouldn't be doing it. Similarly, people use multi-sigs not because they really trust the people running the multi-sig, it's because they need to get some stuff done and they just sort of have to trust the multi-sig. And it's meant to be a bridge to something else, but we need that something else to exist. With this, you can have generalized contracting. You could say, like, as an example, give a person a budget. A certain address can spend this amount within a month, and they can do like this, this, and this, and they have to stay within those parameters. You could say, I'm raising money to buy something. Like one of these DAOs, it's just like, we're going to buy a yacht. And then it's like, the rules are, if I have a contract to purchase a yacht meeting these like parameters by such and such date, I can withdraw the money. If not, you can refund all the people that contributed to the DAO. So you can have like automatic trust there, where you don't need to rely on the goodwill of the person who has like signing rights over the Gnosis safe. They don't have the power. It's controlled by what the rules are, like what actually happened in reality. You got just maximum flexibility with minimal trust. And you can design an organization the way that you would if you were just organizing in regular life, with on-chain incentives to ensure that the funds are going to be used the way that you want, that any smart contract systems controlled by the DAO, any modifications to them also follow these rules, and so on. And being able to upgrade the rules too periodically. So if you want to like pass a new budget, if you want to just like change something about the voting system, change something about the approval system, etc. You need to have a way to do that. And ultimately, I think just move away from multi-sigs entirely. All right, so this is the final 2 slides are like our recruiting slides. So UMA is hiring. We're working on lots of cool stuff. We built Across too at Risk Labs. So Risk Labs is like a foundation that works on UMA and Across and other protocols besides. This optimistic governance thing was just kind of like an internal pitch that I made. I had the freedom to just go and work on that for about a month. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with the Oracle. I mean, we're just barely scratching the surface of what's possible, and you'll never get bored. Really great team. I've been here for a year and a half. We've like doubled the team size. We haven't lost like anybody on like product or engineering or anything else. It's just people come and they stick around. It's a great place to work, and you should definitely apply. Ooh, I guess that was it. So, this is our angel list page. One of the places that you could apply. All right, so I'll jump to questions. Does anybody have any thoughts on optimistic governance? Any thoughts on the Oracle in general? Or yeah.
Thanks. I have a question about just generally. Actually, 2 quick questions. One is the right way of thinking about finality in this system kind of similar to optimistic rollouts, where like you would have some kind of big period before any kind of action based on the results of it? So that's the first question. The second question is, how do you guys think of like, I guess the data availability problem of like you create these rules and it gets disputed, so you just delete the rules?
Yeah, so the 2 questions. The first one is, how do you think about finality for a response? Is it similar to optimistic rollups? And the answer is yes. You can set a custom challenge window for your use case. So if you've got a lot of value at stake, or it's like a complicated question or something, you just want to have extra security, you can set a longer one. A typical one is around 2 hours. And there are people that watch every single proposal for like every contract come through because there are those incentives to dispute invalid proposals. So typically when a dispute comes through, which is rare, it'll happen within a couple of minutes. And that does introduce some complexity if you want stuff to happen quickly, but there's other ways around it by shifting that waiting period onto a different actor within the system. So with the Across Bridge, for instance, 2 hours is a lot faster than 7 days. So if you're withdrawing from an optimistic rollup, it's normally like 7 days by the slow native bridge. 2 hours is way faster, but that's still not very good. The way that we get around that is we have relayers that'll just advance you the money on the receiving chain, and then they're making a proposal to a passive liquidity pool saying, reimburse me, and then they wait for 2 hours. So from a user perspective, you just kind of get your money immediately, and the relayer is getting paid essentially like interest for a 2-hour loan, like the way that you would calculate the fees. But that's not the way the user experiences it. And you could think about how that could tie in with DAO governance too. Like let's say you wanted to have some like token weight rebalancing within your DAO treasury between stables and ETH and your native token or whatever, and you've got certain parameters of like what you want to do in certain situations. 2 hours would be a long way to wait for transactions like that, but you could imagine somebody who's like, I am going to make the trade, and I'm going to ask for reimbursement now, post facto. So they go and do the swap that was approved by governance, follows the strategy, and then they're just waiting for 2 hours to basically get their money back, like out of the DAO treasury. So like they do the swap, make a deposit, etc. And maybe collect a fee from that too. Like maybe you want to pay people to be the active managers of your treasury that are allowed to do certain kinds of swaps, and they can collect like a small fee for doing that, for ensuring that your autonomous DAO actually is running on its own economic incentives, and you don't need like a specific person necessarily once you wrote the rules out. The second question I have now forgotten. Can you remind me? Yeah, data availability. So for optimistic governance in particular, once it's rolled out, I want to encourage people to use IPFS. Where you can demonstrate like, yes, these are the same rules that were approved in the contract specifically. It's not like a website you can update. It's not something that's easy to take down as long as somebody bothers to keep it online. If the rules are like fully offline and like nobody has a copy of them and you can't like get the rules now from the IPFS hash, you might have like bricked your contract, so that's an issue. So make sure that doesn't happen. And I do think there's a transitional period too of like, going from the way that Gnosis safes are run right now. Maybe you have a multi-sig and you are trying to transition out of it. just to have like a safeguard of like just keeping that multi-sig around for like a month or two while you're trying out the module and so on. But yeah, I think that that's important. And IPFS, I think, is probably the best solution for it. Maybe throw in like Filecoin or something too, where it's like linking the proof that these are the correct rule sets and some incentives for somebody to always keep them online. Yep.
How exactly are you furnishing that fraud-proof method for exploitation? I still don't understand how you do that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, how do we like furnish a fraud proof, or more specifically, like how do we prove that the final result, like after a dispute, is correct? Yeah. So the economic incentives there are the voters have voting power based on how much UMA they have. If the oracle doesn't work or it's corrupted in some way, the value of their UMA crashes, especially if there's an attack. The votes on chain are secret initially, so you can't copy other people's votes. You have to sort of think for yourself. And there's new UMA minted with every vote that gets divided pro rata for the voters that voted with the majority, who voted correctly. So your incentive there is to vote what you believe is the correct answer, or I guess more specifically, what you think the majority is going to vote, which is sort of the same thing. And that's like the Schelling point game of you arrive at the Schelling point of here is the answer. And then you also have the methodology to calculate what the answer is. So you're not just flying blind or something. You can go to the UMIP and you can see here's what the identifier says, and then you can go to public data sources. And so identifiers that rely on like a private data source or they're subjective, they're probably not going to make it through the governance process, and those kinds of questions won't really be answered by the oracle. Like they'll be rejected. And we're pretty hard to make sure that you have like backups too. There was one interesting one where there was an identifier around volatility. So this is kind of an off-chain calculation thing plus like, price information. And they provided an API that would deliver like the volatility for ETH, for instance, but then also provided a backup of like, here's the Excel spreadsheets that you would use to do it by hand, or like, here's some other process you don't have to trust our API, which I think is cool. Yeah. All right. No, please. I've got like 10 minutes left. I needed more slides, apparently.
Speaking of what you were just talking about the last question, how do you think about determinism, that you have all these voters, like making sure that they're actually, they're accessing the source in the same exact way or the same exact time, or where does the variance sort of get calculated in there?
Yeah. So in a lot of cases, you're looking at the request time. So imagine that the price request is for like the price of Ethereum at a particular point in time. The identifier is going to say use this, this, and this market, and then take the median, or if they're like higher volume, better markets, like take the median from that, like if one of those markets doesn't seem like it's very good anymore. And you can go and find the actual historical price. So you're like you're matching the timestamp up with what the state of the world was at that point in time. And so that's another part of the governance process, to check that the identifiers have questions that can be answered in an objective way. If you can't get that historical data, or it costs money to do it, like an unreasonable amount, or then that's not really a good question for this oracle, because this is relying on just a person with a computer to be able to arrive at the answer within like a 24-hour window. If it takes longer than that, or there's some missing piece that very few people would be able to answer, it's not a good question for this oracle.
And it's on the contract creator to determine whether the oracle is like right or whether it's
Yes, but if you're using an existing identifier, those have already been checked out, so you can just go ahead and use them. There's also identifiers that are very general, like what Polymarket uses for prediction markets. They use the yes or no query identifier, where you just ask a yes or no question and like provide some values to return, like 1 if yes, 0 if no, 0.5 if like undetermined or something. And for that, I mean, yeah, you just got to think about your questions, like can somebody actually answer that? Like if you're asking for some analysis that you can't just like go and look up. Like for instance, one of the questions might be like, what was the COVID rate according to this data source? You can specify the data source in your question. And yeah, and if you're asking unanswerable questions, you might get back like that 0.5 value. You just might not be able to settle whatever it is your contract wants to do. And that's your responsibility when you're integrating. And going to optimistic governance too, it's very similar. Like if your rules are vague, then transactions might just get blocked and blocked and blocked. Like you need to be clear of like making it easy to tell that transactions are valid. Because if you can't tell, then they're just not going to go through. Because the oracle's not going to try to like guess outside of like a reasonable amount of like interpreting what you meant. Yep.
So just want to understand how governance work. Someone is writing the words, so it's saying the changes.
Oh, hold on one sec.
So I'm trying to understand how the governance works. Like someone is writing the governance proposals, you are saying things later, let's build a bridge. That if accepted on the community on the yes line, someone needs to build the actual code of that. So I'm trying to think how is the engineering team that got another team on this chain, how are they going to prioritize the governance proposals, the actual work that they're doing on chain? Do you have like a certain task force that are like dedicated to governance? Let's say a lot of people are building a lot of governance proposals and there's a lot of hundreds of work stuff to learn. Or maybe like the governance proposals so big, let's build a bridge. The engineering team is doing research, or they are connected. How do you actually
So basically the question is, for a governance proposal, for like, let's build a bridge, for instance, like let's do some big project, how would you actually implement that? And I guess my answer to that would be, this system is really only for stuff that can be enforced on chain. So if it's a larger project like that, the proposal would be more like, let's allocate $2 million to such and such team to build a bridge. If there's no on-chain action, then there's nothing for the governance module to do. You could also do something like we want to like appoint this person and this person to like the team that's going to receive grants to work on the bridge and that kind of thing. And actually writing those proposals that are going to be voted on, somebody does have to take that responsibility. It might be like a core engineering team, because the proposal that you would see on Snapshot or the description of the proposal may or may not match what the transactions actually say. But the governance module in the Oracle system is only going to look at the transactions. You know, the explanation can be there just to like help guide and reason about what's going on with the transactions, but the transactions are all that really matters for the purposes of this system. Did that answer?
what about like smaller proposals? Is that going to be like a task force, engineering task force, smaller ones?
Yeah, I think like smaller proposals are probably better because they're easier to reason about, but they just have to be tied to some kind of on-chain action. So if assigning a task force means that you're like adding some people to like a set, like some group, or like giving them some power over a smart contract system, or the ability to like propose a change to a smart contract system or an upgrade or something, that's potentially something that's enforceable on-chain. And so then your proposed transaction is like add 0x ABC as like a valid proposer for a transaction that would change the smart contract system or something like that. Or like, you know, allocate funds to them to do this. If there's nothing to do on chain, then it's not really enforceable by the Oracle. And so you could take a snapshot vote on it that would just have no transactions tied to it, because there's nothing to really do on chain for that. It's just kind of a temperature check. Yep.
You have the three roles, proposer, distributor, and voter. Are they all permissionless to participate in it?
Yes. Yeah. So anybody can propose. You can also like post rewards for proposers. Probably our most frequent proposer is Polymarket right now. And they have a $50 reward for a correct answer, which is great because the questions are easy, and a $4,000 bond that you lose if your answer is wrong. So the main goal is like properly incentivize people to deliver correct answers quickly while also having like a big punishment for going too fast and getting the answer wrong. Not because you're going to get the wrong answer at the end of the day, because they get disputed and it goes through voting. It just kind of delays things for like 48 hours, which is annoying. So you want to have that penalty there. But there's other systems where you think like somebody's going to propose something without a reward, or like the team is going to propose an answer to this, or some other party has their own incentives. In that case, you don't even necessarily need to offer a proposer reward to try to get somebody else to come and propose. And for disputers, there's always an incentive, because the proposer always posts a bond. And the minimum bond is like the UMA final fee, which is like an anti-spam measure to keep people from just creating like arbitrary disputes to farm UMA voting rewards, just make it expensive to do that. So that bond provides an incentive for the disputer.
Is what UMA is trying to do, is it like specific to optimistic rollups, or is it like also for like relatively proof rollups also?
Yeah, so is what UMA is trying to do specific to optimistic rollups? It is for any EVM chain, basically. So right now we are on Ethereum L1, Optimism, Arbitrum, Boba, and Polygon, but we're looking to expand to other EVM chains too. The voting system is on Ethereum L1. All of the UMA tokens are meant to be there, and so on. But yeah, it can work for like all kinds of products on any EVM compatible chain. And that's our goal. We just need to prioritize which ones in which order, probably based on demand. All right. Also want to add, we got prizes for best uses of UMA. If anybody is thinking about using UMA within their project, I'm here to help. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, sorry. Can you adjust your bond value if that's really?
Yep. Yes. Yeah, you can adjust the bond value. So for a cross, for instance, relayers might be doing like $1 million, $2 million at a pop, and they're proposing like reimburse me for $2 million, but their bond is 10% of the relay amount. So if you're making a proposal of like reimburse me for $2 million, your bond is $200,000, so that you have like a strong disincentive to get the relay wrong or put in like an invalid request, because the disputer will come in and dispute you and they get half of that bond. They get $100,000 now. Yeah, so if you have like a higher value thing, you want to set a higher bond.
You can publish that afterward. You can change the bond value.
Oh, the bond value is per request. So each request has its own proposal bond. And there's a minimum. The minimum is $1,500 just because of the final fee anti-spam thing. But there's no maximum. Like you could set the bond really high. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all the good questions.